Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome. Shabbat Shalom to all of our friends joining us at home. Glad you are here. Shabbat Shalom, welcome. Hi, good to see you again, Marguerite. Okay. Let's do it. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
We are moving into another cycle in our Jewish calendar. We just finished the retelling of our people's story of redemption, and now next week we'll begin this cycle of Yom HaShoah into Yom HaZikaron into Yom HaAtzmaut. And in Israel, when Yom HaShoah, our Holocaust Day of Remembrance, is observed, the entire country goes still. There is a siren that is blaring across the entire country, and whether you're driving on the freeway or whether you're in school, no matter what you're doing, when the siren goes off, everyone just pauses to really take in what this moment means. And so that is what we are here to do tonight. We're here to remember. We are here to recognize that with our people's Passover story, we also know that there are other forms of narrowness that we as Jews and in this world today continue to see and experience. And we're also here to learn from a dear friend and an incredible scholar, Dr. Eliza Luft, who later in our service will be sharing her own family story and also her own academic and soulful wisdom with all of us. So we're going to start, you have a handout in your prayer books. We're going to start by the kindling of memorial lights. And to do this, I want to invite up anyone who is a family member of a survivor, of a Holocaust survivor, or anyone who has visited one of the concentration camps. If you will come up and help us light our 6 candles, I want to invite you to come do so now with us. Let's read together on the top of your handout. We light 6 candles in memory of the 6 million. As we light these candles, we commit ourselves to responsibility for one another, to build on this earth a world that has no room for hatred, no place for violence. Together we pray for the strength to fulfill this vocation. And to move us into Shabbat, I want to begin right under those words with words from our own namesake, Rabbi Leo Beck. He shared these words in Theresienstadt. Week after week, in distress and under unsettled conditions, the Sabbath made a noble way possible for this people, one that was divorced from everything common. Rest was to reign on this day down to the last and smallest instant, from evening to evening, in order to banish all the draws downward, to provide the soul with a broad and lofty space. Without the Sabbath, this people would have to cease being what it is and what it should be. If it parted from it, this people would dispossess itself. Where the Sabbath is understood, so is this people understood. We join together in our songs of Kabbalat Shabbat. We'll begin with familiar words of Tov Lahodot. They can be found on your other supplement. Please join with us. We'll continue on page 20 and 21 with Lecha Dodi. And I just want to draw your attention to the top of page 21. This is the 5th verse that we sing, Hitoruri, Hitoruri, Kiva orech kumi uri, and then it says uri, uri, and continues. And if you read in the English, these are command words. They mean awake, awake. Your light has come, arise, shine, awake, and sing. And so for me, this is telling us that yes, Shabbat is about peace, and yes, Shabbat is about rest, but it's also meant to stir our hearts. It's meant for us to look outside of ourselves to see the suffering that is around us, to take any sense of complacency that we might have, and to nudge it a bit so that we may be more awake and we might arise to our calling for responsibility in this world. We'll join together on the top of 20. We'll be doing verses 1 and 2, and then 5 and 9 on 21. Bottom of 21. on page 28 and continue standing for our call to worship, the Baruch Hu.
The last will and testament of Yossel Rackover. I, Yossel Rackover, descendant of great and pious families, wrote these lines while the Warsaw Ghetto goes up in flames. As the firing around me becomes weaker, and then the last defenders of this outpost fall, I die peacefully, but not complacently, persecuted, but not enslaved, a believer, but not a supplicant. And these are my last words to you, my wrathful God. Nothing will avail you. You have done everything to make me renounce you, to make me lose my faith. But I die exactly as I have lived, a believer. Eternally praised be the God of the dead, the God of truth and law, who will soon show your face to the world again and shake its foundations with your almighty voice. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai
Adonai Elohecha, bechol levavcha ubechol nafshecha, ubechol meodecha,
והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמן.
We will move in a moment to page 40 and words of Michamocha. And every time we arrive at this prayer, I think of so many moments that we have sung this together in community. Just last week at our Women's Seder, there were women literally dancing with their timbrels all around our social hall in joy. And I think about our upcoming community retreat when various members of all generations come together and at camp sing these words in their t-shirts and their Birkenstocks. And I think about every Wednesday, Cantor Haas and I are in this particular space with our religious school students, and they too have a dance party every Wednesday afternoon with such joy as they sing our people's story. And so as we join together for Michamocha, we really get to embrace a different model of what it looks like to practice Judaism, that as we retell our people's story of being in servitude, of being slaves, we then have this model that we get to practice today, which isn't just of remembering, but it's also of experience the joy and the light and the celebration that is our religion and our culture as well. So we'll join together in these words. We're on page 40, and I think Cantor Haas is introducing us to a new-ish melody.
New-ish melody. I've done it maybe once or twice, but I wanted to add, we were trying to think of a Michamocha that really felt appropriate for this evening's service. And while it is it is a mitzvah, it is important that we feel joy. It's also very important that we take a moment to just be. And as I was figuring this out, I read, this is written by Josh Nelson, who I know has visited Leo Beck Temple before, and this was his intention when he wrote this piece. He said, right now, it's hard to just be. These are complicated, uncertain times. Unsure, we have paused at the threshold of this doorway, scared to step forward into something bigger than ourselves. Like the Israelites at the shore of the sea, may we be brave enough to step into the water so that we might emerge on the other side, stronger and more whole. This is
We're on page 40.
Try that with me.
We continue with our words of comfort and peace, Hashkivenu, which can be found on this supplemental page. Join with us. Let's fill this space with our voices. These are words on the bottom of your supplement from Elie Wiesel. When he first met the Rebbe, Gregor had said, "Has nothing changed?" Nothing. What about me? You haven't changed either. And Auschwitz? What do you make of Auschwitz? Auschwitz proves that nothing has changed, that the primeval war goes on. We are capable of love and hate, murder and sacrifice. We are Abraham and Isaac together. God hasn't changed. Gregor was angry. After what happened to us, how can you believe in God? With an understanding smile on his lips, the Rebbe answered, how can you not believe in God after what happened? Whether we're calling out to God in anger or in disappointment, in gratitude, we join together in our Amidah, which is meant to be our conversation with God, our conversation with whatever we believe is bigger than ourselves, and to say whatever it is that we don't usually say out loud because we don't want to or we're not supposed to. This is our time to get to call that to mind and to express it with our whole selves. And we'll join together on page 46, and if you're able, invite you to please rise.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotinu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov.
Hagadol, Hagibor, V'hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'koneh Hakol, V'zocher Chastei Avot Ve'imahot, Umevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, Leman Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer Umoshia Umagen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magen Abraham Bezrat Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechaye HaKol Atah, Rav Lechoshia, Morid Hatal, Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed, Mechaye HaKol Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim V'rofech Olim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato, Lishenei Afar. Micha Mocha Ba'al Gevurot, Umidom Melach, Melech Memit Umechaye, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman Ata L'Hachayot HaKol, Baruch Atah Adonai, Mechaye HaKol, Atah Kadosh V'Shimcha Kadosh, Ukdoshim B'chol Yom, Yechalelu Chasela, Baruch Atah Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh.
We continue in silence through page 62. You may be seated whenever you're ready.
Pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rise.
am honored to call up in a moment first a member of our Leo Bick Temple community, she and her husband, also Dr. Jared McBride, and their delicious tiny human, their son Ezra. They have been members of our community for the past several years, and it's very exciting for us to now get to learn with Eliza. She is an assistant professor of sociology at UCLA. She is the author of her upcoming book, which we are all going to buy, Sacred Treason, Race, Religion, and the Holocaust in France. And she's published a number of articles in the Washington Post, in the New Yorker, LA Times, New York Times, and her work specifically explores how people classify themselves as others, how these classification practices really matter and change in times of war, and how they shape our decisions and our behavior in terms of violence. She's very impressive, exactly. And most importantly, she is just an incredibly kind, thoughtful, and powerful person in this world. And we are honored to have her share her story with us tonight. Come on up, Eliza.
So, Sarah, that song is one of my favorite songs since I was like 8 years old. I've loved that song since I was a child, and I've listened to it on YouTube or Spotify, but I probably haven't heard it sung in person since I was in elementary school. And I knew I'd probably cry tonight, but I didn't think it'd be like before I got up here. So thank you. Such a beautiful song, and your voice is just extraordinary. Thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone on the Zoom and everyone here. I know it's hard with traffic and life and still pandemic stuff to show up, so I really appreciate it. Not only is this a talk that I've spent a lifetime thinking about, but in many ways have resisted writing more than others, I've actually never even lit a candle for the Shoah in my life, which, I grew up in a fairly conservative community, and unless you were the direct child of someone who had died, you didn't light a Yizkor candle. And then in my elementary school, people would light 6 candles, but I was never one of those people chosen to do it. And so thank you for that opportunity also. It's very special for me. So I've long thought about how to characterize my grandparents. When I was a child, to me, they were heroes. They were always heroes, and I'm not sure how deeply I thought about that framing, because as a kid, I knew all 4 of them had survived the Holocaust, and I knew that most of the rest of their families had not. I knew that by the time I was 7, and I have vivid memories of learning about the Shoah in school when I was in 3rd grade. Our teachers showed us films like Night and Fog, and I would search in the stills of the films for people who looked like me. And we would have assemblies where we'd light these yahrzeit candles to remember the 6 million who were killed, while older students took turns saying the names of Hitler's victims. So I remember coming home from school one day, and I asked my parents to tell me more, and they said, talk to your bubby and Zadie. So I sat on my bubby's lap for what felt like hours, but it maybe was less, as she told me all about her family and her family history, that they were in the Kolomia ghetto, where multiple times she had to confront the Germans and defend herself against Nazis, or escape the ghetto and conceal her identity. She was blonde and took great pride in having been an actress before the war, and she would use these skills to try and get food and resources for her family and others who were in the ghetto with her. She told me how her sister and her sister's 3 children were deported to Majdanek and killed upon arrival, how her other siblings were murdered as well. But she miraculously jumped off a moving transport train and hid in a ditch with another sister and her boyfriend before they found some Poles to take them in. The Poles didn't actually know about my grandmother. She remained hidden in the farm under bales of hay and in a hole in the ground where she survived by eating the food that was left over from pigs and animals. So they knew about her sister and her sister's boyfriend, but she remained hidden underneath the ground that entire time. She told me this, and she told me that is also named for her grandmother who helped raise her, And that was it. It was settled. My Bubby was a hero. And my Zadie too. I'll get to his story in a moment. But also my other Bubby and my other Zadie. All of them simply for having survived the most awful, atrocious, horrific, and horrifying experience that my young mind could have ever envisioned. They were heroes for surviving. But years later, after a childhood spent lying in bed and staring at the blue speckled ceiling of my bedroom, wondering how people could be so awful to one another and how God could allow something like the Holocaust to happen, I started to see their heroism in other ways. My Zadie, for example, I could probably cry, it was just his birthday a few days ago and he would have been 106. He was the best, most gentle, loving man, and his smile could light up a room. He always smiled when he saw us. He had these soft but firm hands, and when he held yours in them, they were so memorable that even friends of mine and people from school and synagogue would tell me that they felt special when they saw him, and they shook his hands, and they wished him good Yom Tov as he stood on every holiday in the front of shul towards the left of the bima, and he greeted everybody who crossed his path. He kept a small piece of paper in his wallet with a list of jokes on them so that he could always be ready to make others laugh. And even though he was small, his hugs felt enormous, like being enveloped in the coziest of cocoons. But Zadie, in contrast to Bubby, didn't like to talk about his experiences in the Holocaust or everything that happened afterwards. He did, however, like to write about them, and throughout his 90s, he wrote his memoirs for us to read, which we did, finally binding them after he died. It was only then that I fully realized he wasn't simply a hero for having survived the Holocaust, but for everything he did afterwards too. Because when he was 28 and in a displaced persons camp, he started to work helping other survivors, even though he didn't even know if his family was alive. Among the many things he did was secure access to penicillin, which wasn't easily available, for a critically ill pregnant woman who he ended up saving and who went on to have a healthy baby after having 2 miscarriages in the years following the Holocaust. He also testified about the Holocaust before journalists at Nuremberg. This is before he's even 30 years old. He introduced couples to one another so that they could find love and peace and begin to build a new life and a new home. And when he became the manager of the displaced persons camp, because of all his work helping other refugees, he presided over its transition into a family camp along with my Bubby, who he met while he was there. So Zadie made me realize that surviving the Holocaust was heroic, but so was how he and my Bubby chose to live their lives afterwards. They lived lives devoted to charity, to education, and to family above all. On my brother's wedding day, he told my brother and his wife that all he ever wanted in life was to outlive Hitler and walk his grandchildren down their wedding aisles. What made him a hero was how he lived, not just how he survived. And then there's my great aunt Elizabeth, my Zadie's sister, and she survived Auschwitz and Ravensbrück while the rest of their family was killed too. I always knew after the Holocaust, and then after reuniting with my grandparents, how she prioritized above all else completing her education. She moved to Brooklyn and she put herself through college. She got her bachelor's degree and she became a secretary at a local school. I also knew how she prioritized community and friendships, how she regularly held these big Shabbat dinners at her home and checked in on her neighbors, how she volunteered and donated to charity. But what I didn't know until just a few years before she died in 2020 was that in August 1963, she asked her boss if she could be excused to travel to Washington, D.C. to what was widely anticipated to be a tremendous event of extraordinary importance. Her boss said absolutely not, and after all, what was a single woman like her doing taking a bus to D.C. anyway? She was refused permission to leave her job, and she was socially frowned upon for wanting to go too. But she walked out and she went anyway. She told her boss she didn't care what he thought about her and whether it was safe or wise for her to hop a bus alone and leave town. And she also didn't care about her job if he didn't care to let her leave for this event. So what was the event? It was the March on Washington. My great Aunt Elizabeth put herself and her career, the one she worked so hard to build after surviving the Holocaust, at risk so that she could see Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speak and show her support for Black Americans who still didn't have equal rights in this country, who still continued to suffer and struggle as a result of prejudice and discrimination and inequality. And she taught me that heroism isn't just about survival or about how you live, but also when living what you do for others, including and especially others outside your own community, others who are different from you, who may not have the same privileges as you, and how important it is to be an ally for anyone suffering and use your own experiences as empathy and strength to make the world a better place for all. So each of my grandparents did this, to be honest. They devoted their lives not just to us, but to their communities and to communities outside of themselves. And the older I get, the more I think about what that means as we live through times where, yes, anti-Semitism is increasing, and yes, being Jewish does feel increasingly precarious compared to when it did in the past. I also think about how our fates are linked with others who are less fortunate. I think especially if we are cisgender, then our trans siblings, our brothers and sisters who are under attack every day in this country. And if we are white, then about our Black and brown and Indigenous and Asian friends and colleagues. If we're citizens, then our non-citizen, immigrant and refugee peers and neighbors, and other persecuted religious minorities like Muslims. If we're men, then women and people with reproductive capacity whose rights are being stripped as we speak. After all, when I look back to my grandparents and how they survived the Holocaust and why I'm here today, it's not just because of who they were. Much as they are and always will remain my heroes, it's also because of the courage of others. I think about the Polish family who took in my bubby's sister and her boyfriend and gave them shelter, even if they didn't know that my grandmother was hiding there as well. I think about the Nazi officer and above all, his mother-in-law, who threatened to kick him out of her house and tell her daughter to leave him unless he hid my Zadie in the back of his car and drove him over the border to safety, knowing fully well that the Jews in her town were about to be killed with the support and actions of that very same man. I think about the other women at Auschwitz and then Ravensbrück who regularly contributed small acts of strength and solidarity to give each other something to live for when it seemed to the opposite as if the world was ending. So when I look back to my grandparents and their history and my great-aunt's history and to those that made it possible for them to survive, I'm reminded that at every moment in our lives, we're confronted with an opportunity to choose. We can do bad, we can do nothing, or we can do good. So I hope on this Yom HaShoah, when it sometimes feels as if the past is eerily present, and maybe not repeating itself, but certainly in some senses rhyming, I hope we can all strive to remember to take that courageous step to do good, and not just for ourselves and our communities, but for others too, by recognizing, as these people did, and then as my grandparents did, that all of our fates are linked. Thank you.
There's so much to digest from your grandparents' story, and I know we're all probably still absorbing it. And Elise is going to be here, is going to hang around after services. First of all, you'll see her around at the temple, but she'll stick around for a bit after services if you want to be in conversation with her a bit or ask more about anything that she shared. Thank you so much for allowing us to learn and to remember your family story.
Just as we link ourselves to those in our past who experienced the atrocities that, it's still unimaginable to understand that those actually could have happened. But we link ourselves to them and to those in our lives who are in need of healing, be it of body or of mind or of spirit. We take all of their names and their hearts into our hearts. And I invite you now to share names of those you're thinking of so that we can link ourselves to them. Let's start over here. our hearts as we join together in our Misha Berach. The words can be found in the middle of page 253. 253.
Aleinu can be found on page 282. We invite those who are able to please rise. These are words not on your handout, but they're from Anne Frank. It's really a wonder that I haven't dropped all my ideals because they seem so absurd and impossible to carry out. Yet I keep them because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. I simply can't build my hopes on a foundation of confusion, misery, and death. I see the world gradually being turned into a wilderness. I hear the approaching thunder. I can feel the suffering of millions. And yet, I look up into the heavens, and I think that it will come right one of these days, that this cruelty will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again. In the meantime, I must hold on to my ideals, for perhaps the day will come when I shall be able to carry them out. As we think of the 6 million lives that were lost, as well as the countless others in the Holocaust, we also recognize members in our own community who are observing a yahrzeit and remembering loved ones. We recite Kaddish this Shabbat for Helen B. Aaron, Ada Angel, Jamie Bennett, Paul Stanford Bernhard, Dr. Lester Breslau, Martha Chibnick, Lori Dinkin, Susan Eckley, Barbara Esco, Michael Freimer, Barry Edward Fritz, Robert George, Richard Allen Gilson, Doris Given, Theodore Gold, Harry Goldman, Charlotte Goldman, Beatrix Hamburg, Jackie Hoberman, Sydney Howard, Natalie Camrus, David H. Karp, William Kenton, Esther H. Levy, William Sandy Lockheim, Wally Marks Jr., Barbara Meyer, Alexander Reagans, Harry Schwartz, Jerome Simon, May Small, Charles D. Stein, Milton Sussman, Harry H. Wolf, Bess Goldman Wolf, Craig Zeitman, and Simon Zimmelman. If there are other names that we should add, or if I mispronounce the name of your loved one, I invite you to please say their name at this time. We also think of all of the victims of violence in our people's past and in this world today. We join together as a community in remembrance with words of Mourner's Kaddish on page 294. If you're able, I'll invite you to please rise. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, b'yama divrach yorotei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevorach le'olam ulamei amaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudesha berechu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru amen. Zichronam levracha, may all of their memories truly be a blessing to us.
Something else that we need to do today, and that is that I've been counting the Omer now for the last week and a day, and so it is customary that we announce the day of the Omer that we are on, and the blessing goes like this: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sefirat haomer.
Amen.
And we say, Hayom Tish'a Yamim Shehem Shavua Echad Ushnei Yamim Leomer. Hello. So today, excuse me, is 9 days, which is 1 week and 2 days of the Omer, which is the time between Passover and Shavuot. And so,
We are ascending Sinai together.
yes, we are.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom. Thank you, Chabad.org. Like the one thing.